Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're taking a long, necessary look at a life that, for a brief, intense period, perfectly captured 1980s teen stardom. And then, just as quickly, it became this really devastating cautionary tale.
That's right.
We are examining the trajectory of Corey Haim. For millions of people growing up back then, Haim's iconic smirk, his sort of effortless, vulnerable cool, he was the teen heartthrob for so many.
Absolutely. When you think 80s movies, he's just inseparable from films like The Lost Boys, Lucas, License to Drive, and of course you can't forget the whole cultural thing around the two Coreys with Corey Feldman.
It's a huge phenomenon.
Yeah, and the material we're looking at today, it really lays out this raw kind of chronological roadmap of, well, celebrity disaster. We're going to dive into exactly what went wrong.
Okay, so our mission today is to analyze Haim's entire life arc. We'll trace his really rapid, almost dizzying ascent from this shy kid in Canada to the absolute heights of Hollywood fame. We also need to understand the profound personal costs, including these unconfirmed and really contested claims of sexual abuse.
Right, that's a very difficult part of the story.
And his public struggles with substance abuse, and then the incredibly complex circumstances around his final years.
It's a tragedy that just unfolds at hyperspeed, really. Corey Haim was born in 1971, and he tragically died on March 10th, 2010. He was only 38 years old.
So young.
And we have to emphasize, his early massive success came with these devastating personal costs. Costs that he spent his entire adult life trying and ultimately failing to overcome. And that struggle, it seems clear, contributed directly to his early death.
Okay, let's start right at the beginning then. Before the whole California fame machine really kicked in, back in the suburbs of Toronto, he was born Corey Ian Haim, December 1971. And the sources note he was of Jewish heritage, his Hebrew name, Yeteskel Yehuda.
Mm-hmm. And this early life, it really paints a picture that contrasts so sharply with the confident persona he projected later on, doesn't it? He was raised mostly in Montreal and then later in the Toronto suburbs, Willowdale, Thornhill area. What's really fascinating, though, is that his entry into acting wasn't like some burning desire or theatrical ambition. It was actually more of a therapeutic tool. His mother enrolled him in drama classes, specifically improv and mime, to try and help him overcome what she saw as this really debilitating shyness.
Wow, okay, so he wasn't a born performer in that sense. He was kind of pushed into it to fix being withdrawn.
Seems that way.
That really changes the context for how he later handled massive global fame, which is basically the opposite of shyness.
Exactly. And adding to that contrast, he wasn't initially spotted for acting, but for sports. He was apparently pretty talented at hockey, good enough to be scouted for the AA Thunderbirds before acting started taking up all his time.
Huh. So he starts working commercials around 81 and then lands a regular role as Larry in that Canadian educational show, The Edison Twins.
Yeah, that was his early start, but his move to feature films in the mid-80s was swift, but also, it seems, profoundly scarring almost immediately. His debut was in the 1984 thriller Firstborn. He played a kid whose family is threatened by his mom's violent boyfriend, played by Peter Weller.
Right, and this is where things get difficult early on.
Yeah, this is where you start to see how the industry maybe failed to protect him right from the get-go. That experience with Weller on his very first day of shooting, it seemed to set a really destructive professional precedent.
Tell us about that incident, because it sounds terrifying for a young kid.
Well, Haim was only about 13 at the time, and after a really intense take, he apparently tried to compliment Weller on his performance, just trying to connect with this established actor.
Just being polite, yeah.
And Weller reacted violently. Reports say he grabbed Haim by the collar, threw him up against a wall, and basically screamed at him never to speak to him after a take again, saying he was breaching his concentration.
Threw him against a wall. At 13.
Yeah. It apparently took 3 assistants on set to pull Weller off him. Haim later said he was completely terrified by it.
My bad.
Now, Weller did eventually apologize. He cited, method acting, staying in character. But for a really sensitive, shy 13-year-old on his first big American film set, that act of violence, even if disguised as professional intensity, must have been incredibly damaging.
Oh, absolutely.
It showed him right away that this environment he was entering wasn't necessarily safe, and that his vulnerability could be, well, aggressively exploited.
That's a really powerful point. It's like it established this early pattern.
Yeah.
The intensity of the performance matters more than the safety of the child involved.
Seems that way sometimes. Despite that really traumatic introduction, though, he did quickly gain solid industry recognition. He had supporting roles in Secret Admirer and Murphy's Romance with Sally Field.
Good company there.
Definitely. And then he landed the lead role in the 1985 Stephen King adaptation, Silver Bullet. He played a paraplegic kid fighting a werewolf. The industry definitely saw his talent early. He won his first Young Artist Award for an NBC movie, A Time to Live, playing Liza Minnelli's dying son.
But the sources also mention some early, maybe questionable, career moves made by his father who was managing him back then, specifically turning down a potentially huge role in the Mosquito Coast.
Yeah, the role that ended up going to River Phoenix. That decision gets brought up a lot when people talk about that whole 80s teen actor scene. It maybe suggests that the management around him didn't fully grasp the scale of opportunity in LA, or perhaps lacked the sophisticated guidance needed in that really cutthroat environment.
Makes sense.
But despite the early trauma, despite potential management issues, the path was undeniably set for, well, explosive stardom.
And that explosion definitely came in 1986 with Lucas. This was his big breakout role, right? That coming-of-age story about the intelligent, kind of vulnerable misfit who falls for the cheerleader, played by Cary Green.
The critics loved it. The reaction was immediate and just overwhelming. You mentioned Roger Ebert. His review was glowing. He didn't just praise it, he really analyzed it. Ebert called Haim's character, and I'm quoting here, one of the most three-dimensional, complicated, interesting characters of any age in any recent movie. He is that good.
That is extraordinary praise from Ebert. But let's unpack that. What did Ebert see? What made Haim's performance so special in that film?
Well, it seems it was about channeling genuine teenage emotion into the performance. The sources reveal this really lovely but also kind of heartbreaking detail. Haim turned 14 on the set of Lucas.
Just a kid.
Exactly, and he genuinely fell in love with Cary Green, who played his romantic interest in the film. That unrequited crush, that real teenage angst and, desperation. He apparently used that to fuel his performance. It gave Lucas that layered, complicated authenticity Ebert was talking about.
So his real-life shyness and vulnerability, combined with his acting skill, that's what got him critical acclaim. It's an interesting contrast to the sort of manufactured teen idol image that came later.
Absolutely. The director, David Seltzer, noted that Haim seemed totally at ease with his burgeoning heartthrob status, precisely because he had the substance to back it up. He was magnetic.
Yeah.
And a fun fact, Haim had actually read for River Phoenix's role in Stand By Me. He apparently got offered that part the very same day he was offered Lucas. He chose Lucas and always said he never regretted it.
Interesting choice.
Yeah.
But the truly iconic moment, the thing that really cemented his pop culture status, that has to be The Lost Boys in 1987. That film grossed over $32 million. It's still an absolute 80s classic. Horror-style vampires.
Oh, yeah. And critically, this is the movie where the two Coreys' partnership with Corey Feldman really ignited. It cemented them as the defining teen icons of the decade. They'd actually crossed paths earlier when Haim auditioned for Mouth and the Goonies, which Feldman got.
Right, yeah, I remember that.
But Lost Boys put them on the map together, and it led them to become, incredibly, the highest-paid teen stars of the 1980s.
They were just inescapable. You couldn't open a Bop or Tiger Beat magazine without seeing them. Haim's trademark lopsided smirk was everywhere.
That smirk totally defined him. But the sources are really clear that the pressure was just escalating faster than he could possibly handle it. This period of maximum fame coincides directly with the start of his substance use. He admitted later to drinking beer on the set of Lucas back in '85.
14.
Yeah. And specifically trying marijuana on the set of The Lost Boys a year later. It seems the high-pressure, maybe largely unsupervised environment just facilitated that early experimentation.
And the peak of this whole era might be 1988's License to Drive, co-starring Feldman again and Heather Graham.
That film kind of exemplified their chaotic rise. The director, Greg Beeman, noted there were shenanigans behind the scenes, the two Coreys disappearing sometimes. But he also said they always showed up for work, kept that professional front up, even as the partying got more intense.
And there's that production anecdote that's just pure 80s craziness. Haim was only 16 when they filmed it, and he only had a learner's permit.
Right, which meant an adult actually had to be hidden, like on the floor or in the back seat of the Cadillac he drove in the movie, just so it was legal.
While at the same time, his fame was so huge, he was getting nearly 2,000 fan letters every single week.
Yeah, imagine that. The exterior life was just blockbuster success, global adoration. But here's the really critical pivot point, as stated by Haim himself later on. He said that License to Drive was his breaking point for becoming addicted to drugs.
Wow.
So this film, the one that represented the absolute height of his fame and earning power, was simultaneously the gateway to his lifetime of crippling addiction. The internal war had already started, right there at the peak.
That's chilling. And the decline after that peak, after License to Drive, it was shockingly swift, wasn't it?
Yeah.
The sources show major red flags within just a year, signs that the internal chaos was starting to spill out publicly.
Exactly. In April 1989, Haim was scheduled to appear live on stage at Knott's Berry Farm. And the irony here is just excruciating. It was for a teen anti-drugs campaign.
Oh, wow. And that appearance had to be cut short, didn't it?
It was total chaos. An audience of like 1,000 screaming girls just descended on the stage, rushing forward. It became a serious safety hazard. Fire marshals actually had to physically escort Haim out.
Terrifying for him, probably.
Yeah, amidst that insane intensity of adoration, Haim later confessed that that experience made him terrified of going on any stage again. That intense fear of public performance seemed to completely eclipse any joy he got from acting or connecting with fans.
And compounding this was the public acknowledgement of his substance abuse,
Mhm.
which was still a huge taboo for a teen idol back then.
Yes. March 1989, he'd just gotten out of rehab, and he made that infamous admission on the Arsenio Hall show. Haim had actually set up this pre-recorded drug advice line for teenagers.
I remember that.
Yet he openly admitted on Arsenio's show that he was loaded intoxicated while he was recording that advice for kids. It's hard to imagine a more devastating public contradiction. It just fundamentally eroded the authenticity of his image and, his ability to work professionally after that.
Yeah, it's tough to come back from. So as the 90s began, his drug problems just got worse, and his career quickly downgraded. He transitioned almost entirely to direct-to-video films. He starred in Prayer of the Roller Boys in 1990, but sources say his performances were suffering noticeably. He rapidly lost that core box office audience.
And the behind-the-scenes accounts from this period, this rapid decline, they're just heartbreaking. And they really serve as a severe indictment of the industry environment at the time. Let's look at what Nicole Eggert said. She was his co-star and fiancé for a while then.
Right. She was very candid about how bad things got.
She recalled filming with him during the day and then spending nights with him in the emergency room. She said he'd be hooked up to an IV, begging doctors for a different prescription, just trying to detox. But here's the really critical, honestly horrifying detail that shows how normalized addiction became in his professional life.
What's that?
She noted that medics on set would often facilitate his needs to prevent withdrawal, basically acting as enablers just to keep the production going.
Wait a minute. The professional medical staff who should be there for protection were instead helping him manage his addiction just to stop delays in filming.
That's the powerful implication from her account. Medics, healthcare providers, seemingly co-opted into ensuring his physical dependence was maintained just enough so he could keep working. That kind of environment makes true recovery almost impossible, doesn't it?
Absolutely impossible.
Seth Green, who worked with him later, he kind of captured the duality. He said Haim was both this sweet, hardworking professional who really loved acting and also this tormented addict whose behavior just became increasingly erratic.
And this professional strain, it inevitably broke the two Corey's partnership, didn't it?
Yeah. In 1996, Corey Feldman was directing a film called Busted, and he was forced to fire Haim from it because his behavior was completely inconsistent, and he refused to stop his drug use on set.
And alongside the professional collapse came complete financial ruin. By 1997, he was totally broke. This is the guy who was the highest paid teen star just a few years earlier.
He filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in July 1997. Filing for Chapter 11, which is technically a reorganization, it just reveals the scale of the disaster, especially when you look at the numbers. He owed a staggering $100,000 to the IRS
Wow.
and another $100,000 in other outstanding debts.
And what were his assets at that point? This is maybe the most stark illustration of how fast and how far he fell.
His listed assets were just shocking in their scarcity. He listed only $100 in cash.
$100.
$100 cash.
Yeah.
$750 worth of clothing. A 1987 Alfa Romeo Spider, probably worth something, but still. A $31,000 pension fund. And $7,500 in royalty rights.
That's something.
Think about it. A star who commanded millions just a decade before reduced to $100 cash and less than $1,000 worth of clothes. It was a direct consequence of mismanagement, sure, but overwhelmingly chronic addiction.
The sources also detail how he got sued by Lloyd's of London for $375,000 because he failed to disclose his drug addiction as a pre-existing medical condition on an insurance form when he had to pull out of a film in '96. The legal and financial hits just kept coming.
It paints this just terrifying picture of abandonment, really. A young man who went from having absolutely everything to absolutely nothing, largely because the systems around him, financial, legal, they failed to protect him, and in some ways actively penalized him for the addiction itself.
Which brings us to that really disturbing snapshot we got in the 2001 True Hollywood Story.
Oh, that footage was hard to watch. It showed Haim, he was 29 then, living in this really Spartan apartment above a garage in Santa Monica with his mother. He appeared disoriented, often kind of unintelligible in the interviews, but the single most telling anecdote, the one that just perfectly encapsulates his degradation, it's the pawnbroker.
The pawnbroker story, yeah.
The pawnbroker recalling Haim coming in and literally begging for $3, just $3 to buy a slice of pizza.
A former global teen idol who defined a whole generation, reduced to begging a pawnbroker for pizza money. That single anecdote just speaks volumes about how far the system, society, everything allowed him to fall. Despite his documented efforts to get help, he'd already been to rehab something like 15 times by that point.
15 times. The cycle was just relentless.
Given that incredibly harrowing state back in 2001, it's almost understandable, in a way, why he'd attempt a reality TV comeback. Which leads us to The Two Coreys. That show premiered in 2007 on A&E. The whole premise was Haim moving into Feldman's house with Feldman's wife, Susie, trying to get his career back on track and maybe resurrect the old duo.
Right. They were both credited as executive producers. They had creative input. But the premise, which I think was intended to be this sort of lighthearted look at two former stars trying to find their footing again, it just devolved very quickly. The footage ended up showing the real ravages of Haim's addiction. His prescription drug abuse became impossible to hide on camera.
The dynamic just became toxic, didn't it? Leading to the show being canceled midway through season 2 in July 2008.
Yeah, the estrangement was complete by then. Feldman publicly stated he didn't consider Haim a safe person to have around my wife and child at the moment. But this rift, it was deepened immeasurably by a horrific and incredibly complex disclosure that actually played out on the show itself.
This is where we have to talk about the sexual abuse claims. This narrative is just one of the most painful and, as you said, contested parts of his entire story.
It really is. In one of the show's darkest moments, Haim disclosed to Feldman, on camera, that he had been sexually abused when he was 14 by someone Feldman knew, an acquaintance.
On the show.
On the show. Haim claimed the abuse had continued for 2 years, and crucially, he claimed that Feldman had known about it, which, understandably, caused this devastating rift between the former best friends.
And the sources highlight that the fallout and the complexity around these abuse claims just continued long after Haim's death. Feldman detailed the alleged sexual abuse in his 2013 memoir, Choreography.
Right. In that book, Feldman claimed Haim was tricked into engaging in a painful act by a man on the set of Lucas, who apparently told him that sex between men and boys was normal in Hollywood. But what makes this so incredibly difficult is the amount of conflict and denial that followed those claims. Haim's own mother, Judy Haim, threatened to sue Feldman in 2016. She called him a scam artist just looking for money and attention.
So the victim's own mother was refuting the details Feldman was putting out there.
Exactly. Judy Haim later denied specific abusers named by Feldman, although in a 2017 interview she did accuse someone else, Dominic Brascia, of having sexually abused her son. It becomes this horrifying, tangled web of conflicting claims and denials. It suggests the trauma was maybe so vast and deep that the actual narrative was nearly impossible to pin down, even among those closest to him.
Feldman then doubled down on his allegations in his 2020 documentary, My Truth, The Rape of Two Coreys.
He did. He reasserted that Charlie Sheen had raped Haim on the Lucas set, claiming Haim described the incident in graphic detail to him. Sheen, for his part, has vehemently denied those allegations and later settled a defamation lawsuit against the publication that first reported them.
So denials and legal action.
Right. What's important here, for our understanding, is that even in death, Haim's narrative regarding abuse remains incredibly contested and painful. It just underscores the extreme vulnerability of child actors back then, and maybe the systemic failures that allowed such circumstances to persist, regardless of the specific legal outcomes of these later allegations.
Amidst all this intense personal turmoil, the reality show drama, the abuse claim, and that full-page ad in Variety in 2008, that desperate public plea.
Yeah, saying, this is not a stunt, I'm back, I'm ready to work, I'm ready to make amends. It was heartbreaking, really.
But his comeback attempts were just inevitably undermined by the ongoing addiction. When they were filming Lost Boys, the triad in 2008, He was initially denied a role. He was filmed actually weeping when he found out.
And then when he was finally scheduled for a cameo, reports say he turned up on set, obviously under the influence, and couldn't even remember his lines. The talent was clearly still there, somewhere, but the reliability had just completely vanished.
He also tried to develop another reality show, didn't he? With Gerard McMahon, the guy who wrote Cry Little Sister from Lost Boys.
Yeah, Lost Boy Found. It was meant to document his addiction and recovery through music. They filmed a pilot, but the show never got picked up.
He did manage to complete a handful of films in his final years, though. Crank, High Voltage, American Sunset, Decisions, and critically, on his very last project, The Dead Sea, he actually requested a clean set from the producers, trying to reduce temptation.
Which shows he was still fighting, still trying. Yet even on that set, other cast members commented on his hyperactivity, his need for attention. The internal struggle was just constant, a never-ending battle to reconcile that immense talent he had with his crippling dependency.
Which brings us to that final tragic day, March 10th, 2010. He was only 38 years old.
Just 38. He'd been struggling with what seemed like flu symptoms for a couple of days. According to the reports, he collapsed after getting out of bed, fell onto his knees. His mother called 911.
That 911 call was leaked online, wasn't it? A truly devastating listen.
Yeah, a 10-minute call. Just awful. He was pronounced dead shortly after arriving at Providence St. Joseph Medical Center in Burbank.
And the initial investigation, given his very public history, understandably immediately suspected an accidental overdose. Police retrieved bottles of multiple prescription drugs from his apartment. Valium, the cotton, Soma, which is a powerful muscle relaxant, and haloperidol, an antipsychotic.
The sheer amount of drugs found led to an immediate, major investigation by the California Attorney General at the time, Jerry Brown. And what they uncovered revealed the absolutely staggering depth of Haim's prescription drug crisis and the systemic failures that enabled it.
Let's delve into that, because the findings were shocking. It was determined Haim had been engaged in doctor shopping.
Yes, and the numbers are just mind-blowing. Haim was found to have obtained an astonishing 553 prescription pills in the 32 days leading up to his death.
553 pills in just over a month.
In 32 days. The breakdown included 195 Valium, 149 Vicodin, 194 Soma, and 15 Xanax.
How is that even possible? How does someone obtain that many?
The sources explain the mechanism. It was classic doctor shopping combined with an illegal prescription drug room. Haim was reportedly using illegal aliases, visiting 7 different doctors and 7 different pharmacies. He'd claimed to each physician and pharmacist that he wasn't seeing any others. The Attorney General confirmed Haim obtained OxyContin through this illegal ring and called him the poster child for prescription drug addiction. It really revealed how easily the healthcare system could be exploited back then. An arrest was later made in connection with that illegal prescription pad ring.
And what about the doctors involved? Did they face consequences?
Well, many of the doctors who were subpoenaed reported feeling duped by Haim, which maybe indicates the lack of centralized prescription monitoring systems back then. Records showed Haim had received thousands of pills over the preceding year. This all just solidified the belief that his death was certainly an outcome of extreme, long-term prescription drug abuse.
Okay, so given the sheer volume of drugs, the Attorney General's investigation, the poster child label, this sounds like an open and shut case, right? Death by prescription overdose. But then the official autopsy report came out in May 2010. And it offered a very different and, frankly, really shocking conclusion.
It completely contradicted the initial suspicion and the whole focus of the police and AG investigation. The LA County coroner ruled his death a natural death.
Natural. After finding 553 pills. How?
The official immediate cause of death was listed as diffuse alveolar damage and community-acquired pneumonia.
Okay, can we break those down? What do those mean in plain English?
Sure. Diffuse alveolar damage points to widespread injury to the tiny air sacs in the lungs. It's typically linked to severe infection, maybe chronic inhalation of toxins or other major lung issues. Community-acquired pneumonia is just that a lung infection caught outside of a hospital.
Okay. And there were other contributing factors listed too, right?
Yeah.
But not the immediate cause.
Exactly. The report also listed significant contributing factors. Hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, which means an enlarged heart, often linked to chronic stress on the cardiovascular system, and coronary arteriosclerosis, which is hardening of the arteries.
So, heart and lung problems. But what about the drugs?
This is the crucial part. The coroner stated very clearly that the toxicology report revealed no significant contributing factor from that high volume of pills in the immediate cause of death.
So his physical body, his lungs, his heart, they ultimately failed him. and that was ruled a natural death, even though the years of chronic addiction and abuse almost certainly contributed to those physical conditions developing over time. That paradox is maybe the most difficult element of his entire story.
It really forces you to confront the difference between the immediate trigger and the systemic cause, doesn't it? The irony is just profound. The guy labeled the poster child for the prescription drug crisis didn't technically die from an acute overdose of those drugs. He died because his vital organs were already severely compromised.
The farewell itself was also marked by sadness and difficulty. A private Jewish funeral took place back in Thornhill, Ontario.
Corey Feldman chose not to attend. He cited a wish to minimize media publicity for the family, which is maybe understandable, but he did release a very public open letter saying, "I always feared this day would come."
And the financial devastation that plagued his life, it continued even after his death, didn't it? Haim died with almost nothing. The family initially had to appeal online for burial funds.
Yeah, that public appeal was just the final, heartbreaking chapter in his financial story. While a memorabilia site initially made a contribution, that payment was apparently retracted after the funeral home stepped in to cover the initial costs. His personal effects, things he owned, were eventually put up for auction on eBay because the family needed money to cover the remaining expenses. Just tragic.
And finally, there was that public snub that really highlighted how Hollywood had largely moved on from, or maybe just forgotten, this troubled star. Haim was omitted from the in memoriam tribute montage at both the Screen Actors Guild Awards and the Academy Awards that following year.
Yeah, a lot of people, including Feldman, saw that as a final, significant public snub. It felt like the industry's final dismissal of a life that they had elevated, definitely exploited, and then ultimately seemed to abandon, despite the immense public adoration Haim once commanded.
So, looking back at Corey Haim's life now, we see this immense paradox layered onto a deep, deep tragedy. Here was an actor whose talent was undeniable, recognized globally by critics like Roger Ebert. He achieved absolutely stratospheric fame by his mid-teens. Yet all of that success was contrasted so sharply with crippling personal trauma, including those really difficult and contested sexual abuse claims and the addiction that just came to define his entire adulthood and ultimately compromise his physical health.
Yeah, the sources make it undeniably clear that his early success, the money, the fame, it utterly failed to protect him. In fact, you could argue the fame and the environment of the industry made him uniquely vulnerable. It provided the means and the opportunity for his addiction to just flourish, even to the point where, as we discussed, medics on set were reportedly enabling him just to keep the cameras rolling.
It truly is a case study on the corrosive cost of unmanaged child stardom, isn't it? And the failure of pretty much all the supporting systems, medical, legal, professional, to intervene effectively before it was too late.
And maybe here's a final point for you, the listener, to think about. Corey Haim procured, 553 pills in 32 days through doctor shopping and an illegal prescription ring. That investigation rightly led the Attorney General to call him the poster child for the prescription drug addiction crisis. Yet his official cause of death was ruled natural due to pneumonia and an enlarged heart. The system failed him spectacularly in life by enabling, or at least not stopping, his addiction. But in death, that natural cause's ruling almost forces us to see how the years of chronic substance abuse, the internal struggle, the systemic neglect, how that was the real, final destroyer of his physical body. That deep connection between the long-term neglect, the chronic dependency, and the ultimate failure of his vital organs, maybe that is the core painful truth of the Corey Haim story.